Long ago, in the city that sat between hills and a river, a man walked the streets whose voice would echo through centuries. It was the age of kings and empires, a time when Jerusalem raised its walls and the courts glittered with gold. Yet beneath the surface there stirred a trembling of conscience. Markets were busy and harvest seemed sufficient, but the poor kept their distance from tables that belonged to the powerful. In that tense balance, Isaiah was born, a son of the land and of the temple, a man trained in the rites and the language of the sacred, and a witness to the contradictions of his age. The journey of Isaiah begins in a place of worship and ends in a horizon of judgment and hope, where salvation is promised to a people who must first be confronted with their own choices. The city smelled of fresh bread, goat smoke, and cedar. Lamp oil burned in small bowls, and incense rose like thin clouds into the temple chambers. Yet along the paved streets rose murmurs of discontent, the creak of chariot wheels burdened with supplies grown scarce, and the soft padding of sandals that belonged to those who had nothing left to sell. King Uzziah was remembered in stories of strength, Jotham in administrative reforms, Ahaz in decisions that would test the nation, and Hezekiah in a future to come that would hinge on faith. The politics were complicated by the presence of great empires on the horizon, Assyria and Egypt claiming influence, while merchants traded in promises. In this climate, a prophet learned to see both the outward splendor and the inward corruption. He learned to taste the prayers of the faithful and to hear the silence where prayer should have been. Isaiah's backstory was simple in origin and complex in consequence. He grew up near the temple courts, a boy who played under columns and listened to priests recite the songs of Israel. He learned to read the scrolls, to trace the letters with his fingers, to speak the ancient names in a voice that carried respect. As a youth, he watched his father instruct the household in Sabbath practices, and he breathed the scent of oil and burned offerings. But early on, a loss marked him. A mentor died during a pestilence, leaving Isaiah with a hollow that felt like a question without an answer. That grief sharpened his ears, and he began to notice the small injustices. A widow turned away at market, a laborer paid less than his due, a prayer uttered for show rather than from the heart. Those observations turned into a vocation, a sense that seeing would become speaking, and that speaking might come at a cost. By adulthood, he was known for words that cut like a blade, and for a tenderness that surprised those who expected only stern rebuke. In the year when the temple rituals were full and the priests kept their stations, Isaiah walked into the inner sanctum, and the air changed. The account of that day reads like thunder in quiet chambers. The light that filled the holy place was not ordinary. It trembled like a sun through stained glass. It smelled of incense and crushed myrrh, and the sound was like many waters rolling. Seraphim hovered, each with 6 wings, their voices weaving the syllables, "Holy, holy, holy," and the foundations of the thresholds shook under the weight of worship. Isaiah felt heat on his face, the grit of dust under his sandals, the pressure of awe pressing on his chest. He spoke, and his voice was small. A seraph reached with a burning coal held by tongs. The coal hissed as it touched his lips, and a sensation of cleansing moved through him. He heard the Lord say, in words that filled the space and his memory, "Whom shall I send, and who will go for us?" And Isaiah answered with a trembling but resolute heart, "Here am I, send me." The scene presented sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch in concert, making the calling unmistakable. The call brought immediate consequence. The Lord told Isaiah that his message would be hard, that he would speak to a people who would hear and not understand, who would look and not perceive. The prophet received a commission that combined warning and promise. In a brief exchange, Isaiah asked, "How long, Lord?" And the Lord replied, "Until cities lie waste and houses are empty, until the land is desolate." Isaiah responded with a mix of fear and resolve. Then I will speak the truth, even if the ears grow dull. This dialogue unfolded with a rhythm of assent and admonition, each line sharpening the mission. He left the temple with the taste of coal on his lips and a heavy awareness that his life would be a voice against complacency. Soon his ministry spilled into the streets, where he confronted the daily practices of idolatry and the comfort of alliances. He named leaders who loved pomp over justice. He described altars set up in secret courtyards and merchants who worshipped profit. Scenes of market life were painted with sensory detail. The metallic clink of coins, the sweet rot of fruit left to spoil, the rough texture of cloth used to hide stolen goods, the bright banners that masked mourning. Among the secondary figures who populated his world were King Ahaz, who sought the counsel of foreign rulers, King Hezekiah, who would later seek healing, Shir-Jashub, his son, who bore a symbolic name, Maher-Shalal-Hashbaz, another child whose very name spoke prophecy, Eliakim, the steward, who rose under pressure, and Shebna, the official whose pride would be noted. Each character acted and reacted. Ahaz received counsel. He answered with impatience. He sat with advisers and then turned away in frustration. Hezekiah prayed with trembling hands. He listened and then acted with humility. Shir-Jashub watched his father with a face both proud and afraid. Maher-Shalal-Hashbaz became a living oracle, carried in the arms of a household that felt both wonder and dread. A first moment of intense tension came when foreign envoys surrounded the outer walls, bringing offers and threats. Isaiah stood before the council, the stone cool under his fingers, and he saw the city hold its breath. He remembered the smell of campfires and the metallic reek of weapons. He felt his clothes stick to his back with sweat. He tasted dust on his tongue from 1,000 marching feet. In those minutes his inner debate raged. Should he urge resistance, counsel submission, or call the people back to dependence on the Lord? Memory of the temple vision pressed upon him, the coal that burned his lips, the command to speak despite refusal. He chose to speak the truth and to warn of the consequences, even knowing the words might fall like seed on rocky ground. Dialogue with kings became a recurring scene, and here direct exchanges expanded to reveal motives. In one council, Isaiah faced King Ahaz. Isaiah said, "Do not fear the plots of nations." Ahaz replied, "Our allies promise safety." Isaiah answered, "Allies made in fear become chains." Ahaz countered, "You ask for faith, I ask for survival." Isaiah persisted, "Faith is not a gamble, it is the foundation." Ahaz sneered softly, "Foundations do not feed my armies." Isaiah lowered his gaze and said, "The Lord will provide a sign to those who seek." Ahaz left the hall, muttering, "Signs are fine for the hopeful." This exchange showed the tension between political expediency and spiritual trust, each sentence revealing posture, emotion, and consequence. Another high-tension moment arrived when news reached the court that a child would be born and his name would carry meaning. Parents whispered in kitchens, bread baked in smaller loaves, and teachers paused in their recitation of the law. Isaiah felt joy and dread mingled like wine. He touched the child's hair and smelled the sweet, clean scent of newborn skin. Inside, the prophet wrestled with visions of a stump that would sprout, of a shoot from Jesse, of a ruler who would judge with righteousness. Memory of past failures and future promises fought for dominance in his heart. He spoke to those around him. From small things, great things will come. Some believed, some scoffed, and in that tension, the seeds of hope were sown. Isaiah's ministry also produced signs that confirmed his words. In one recorded miracle, a fever left a king after a night of prayer. The room had the hush of midnight, wool swaddles creaked, lamps dripped soft wax. A hand found a wrist and felt a pulse slow. Isaiah knelt, the stone beneath him cold, and he laid his hands with a reverent touch. The king breathed, the color returned to his face, and the court would not forget the sound of relief like a released sigh. That healing did not erase all opposition, but it created a moment where politics yielded to providence. Oracles against nations expanded Isaiah's gaze beyond Jerusalem. He spoke of Assyria like a whirlwind that would strip fields and topple proud empires. He named Babylon as a potter shaping empires by cup and wheel. Egypt was depicted as a river that could drown pride. The images were visceral, tents rent by wind, chariots grinding stone into dust, banners burned and hauled away. In these prophecies, the Lord spoke of judgment that would touch all nations, not only Israel, for the Lord is sovereign over all. Yet these pronouncements always moved toward mercy. Even in wrath, the promise of a remnant, a group preserved through grace, appeared as a thread of gold through dark cloth. The text of his messianic hope unfolded with precise and tender images. Isaiah spoke of a shoot from the stump of Jesse, who would grow not by might but by spirit. He painted scenes of predator and prey lying down together, where a child could lead and no harm would come, where a root would bear justice and righteousness would be the belt of his reign. He spoke of a servant who would suffer, who would be pierced for the sins of many, whose silence would be a sacrificial strength, and whose sorrow would open the way to reconciliation. He spoke of a banquet where the Lord would wipe away tears and remove the veil of mourning. These images connected to promises in Isaiah 11 and Isaiah 53 and Isaiah 65, and they formed the horizon toward which his warnings pointed. At roughly one-third through our story, a pause for reflection feels necessary, and we invite you to join the conversation. If the vision and the scenes of confrontation moved you, breathe and consider this question now. What injustice in your community stirs something in your chest the way the prophet's vision stirred Isaiah? Take a moment to name it. In the comments below, write one word or a short phrase that names the wound you see. For example, corruption, homelessness, broken families, addiction, lack of compassion. Your word matters because it joins a chorus and helps others see they are not alone. We will read and honor these words with respect and prayer. Thank you for sharing. Now let us continue with the narrative and see how Isaiah translated vision into persistent action. Isaiah's words sometimes fell on deaf ears, sometimes found soil, and sometimes stirred kings to uneasy action. He confronted Shebna for his pride and Eliakim for his stewardship. He called the priests to genuine sacrifice rather than rote ritual. He addressed the merchant class and the ruling council. Scenes of confrontation contained dialogue exchanges that revealed inner motives. A priest said, "Our rights will suffice." Isaiah replied, "Rights without justice are hollow." A merchant retorted, "We give what is required." Isaiah observed, "Your scales tip toward gain, not fairness." A noble defended his wealth by saying, "I earned it." Isaiah answered, "Earning that harms neighbor is theft in the sight of the Lord." 4 other moments of sustained tension demanded deeper pause. The first was the day the temple doors trembled and a national decision seemed imminent. Isaiah remembered the taste of dust and the noise of horses. He thought of the coal and of the Lord's voice. The second was the night of a siege, when drums sounded and the family kitchens emptied. He stood watching flames on the horizon and heard children call for fathers who were not there. The third was when false prophets promised victory in foreign alliances, and the people were tempted to follow. He heard smooth words promising security and felt bile rise in his throat. The fourth was the morning after a failed council session, when hope seemed drained, but a whisper of promise remained. In each moment his heart pressed between despair and trust, and he chose to keep speaking. The latter chapters of Isaiah's journey widen into hope that looks beyond present catastrophe. He envisioned a restored city where justice rolls like a river and mercy like an unending stream. He described a ruler called Emmanuel, meaning God with us, who would bring light to those in darkness. He foretold a remnant, a faithful seed preserved through trials, a community rebuilt on justice and peace. These promises have echoes in Isaiah 7, Isaiah 9, Isaiah 11, and Isaiah 61, and they offer a future where salvation and judgment work together to refine and to rescue. As the narrative closes, practical application becomes urgent. If Isaiah called a people to integrity and justice, then we today are called similarly. Justice may mean advocating for fair wages or standing with those evicted from their homes. Mercy may mean bending our schedules to serve the lonely or listening to a neighbor's pain. The remnant concept invites us to be a faithful community that refuses easy compromise. In your life, consider one concrete step you can take this week to embody justice and mercy. Pray for courage to speak, and then act where you can. Epilogue at 1 month finds communities beginning to stir. Small groups that read the prophecy gather under dim lamps and discuss the images of the shoot from Jesse. They report that conversations at markets and cafes now include the language of justice. A local council member who had read a passage in a meeting proposed a small relief fund for laborers. Friends who once argued about means to an end began to speak with one another. The small changes feel fragile but real. People note that prayer meetings have more attendance and that a few families offered food to neighbors in need. There is no grand overturning of structures yet, but ripples are appearing. The prophet's voice seems distant and near at the same time, and communities ask for guidance on how to turn conviction into consistent practice. Epilogue at 3 months shows deeper patterns emerging. The relief fund found a steward who distributed aid with transparency. A local market agreed to a code of fairness for wages after a public testimony moved merchants. A school invited a speaker to teach children about dignity and neighbor love rooted in ancient texts. Some who were cynical began to attend a small study group and admit privately that they felt hope. Yet resistance persists. Some leaders who benefited from the old ways pushed back. Complaints were lodged, and the cost of speaking up became evident for a few. Nevertheless, new networks of care formed, and a community table began meeting weekly, offering a meal and conversation. These tangible acts did not erase systemic problems, but they testified that prophecy can kindle practical reforms when people are willing to sacrifice comfort for justice. Epilogue at 6 months reveals a mixed but promising harvest. Several households registered with community aid, and a modest clinic opened to serve basic needs. There are stories of individuals who were reconciled and of arguments settled through mediated listening practices. The cultural language shifted a bit. Neighbors now speak of responsibility in the presence of scarcity. At the same time, larger forces remain unchanged. Empires and markets still press, and the temptation to seek expedient alliances continues. Yet the presence of a remnant is clear, a group committed to both truth and mercy. They continue to read the scriptures, to pray, to hold leaders accountable, and to offer hospitality. The prophet's words have become a living stream, shaping daily decisions and public policies in small but meaningful ways. To close, remember that seeing the glory of the Lord transforms vocation into action. Isaiah's vision and life confronted injustice and proclaimed both judgment and hope. We are invited to the same posture, to speak truth with tenderness and to act with courage for the vulnerable. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear about justice tied to mercy. If you have a single word that names an injustice in your community, write it below and join the conversation. Subscribe for more deep reflections that connect faith, history, and practice. May the vision that inspired Isaiah guide our feet toward justice and our hearts toward hope.